Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience Podcast. Mike has over 31 years experience in real estate, finance, and investing. He's passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
So what can you expect from the Mike Litton Experience? You can expect stories that will inspire, motivate, advice that will sharpen your focus, and expert information on real estate, finance, and market conditions.
Served in the Graves Registration Service.
Yeah.
And the fact that nobody ever thought maybe these guys needed a break, maybe a counseling. Now, today, we talk about mental health issues every day. It's in the news. Famous people, Simone Biles, The Rock, all kinds of people say, yes, we've struggled with mental health issues.
Well, didn't Miss America just...
Yes,
America
she just stepped down.
Yeah.
She said, I have a problem and I have to take care of myself. And so in our time, mental health issues are not a stigma. We don't look at people like it's like there's something wrong with you. I mean, if you remember Patton and how he went to the guy who had post-traumatic stress in the hospital and slapped him and called him a yellow-bellied coward.
Mm-hmm.
We don't do that now. We shouldn't do that now. But guess what? The military doesn't help these people.
Yeah.
They don't. I have talked to people who are soldiers who have mental illness, post-traumatic stress, are horribly screwed up, and they don't want to tell their commanding officers their careers will be over.
Yeah.
The military says, oh, yes, we offer them help. No, you don't. Because mental health issues are a weakness to them. And look, even in World War I, men came home and they say, oh, they were shell-shocked. No, they had mental illness from the horrible things they had to do. And in my world, the military needs to start upping their game and helping these people.
Yeah, they really do.
They have 20, depending on who you look at, 20 veterans/soldiers or veterans/service people kill themselves every day in this country.
22.
Yeah, I've seen varying number, but whatever it is, it's too many. One is too many.
No, I agree. I totally agree.
They're doing it every day. Okay. And they're putting other people in danger, their family members in danger because they need help, but the military doesn't. They say they want to help, but I don't believe they do.
Yeah.
I think they want to make it go away and go, we're strong, we're powerful. No. And that's why they recruit kids. I really believe that we should pass a law that says if we're going to throw a war, we're having a war, you have to be 40 to fight. You have to be 40 years old or you can't fight. And guess how quickly we'd find another way not to have a war.
Yeah.
40-year-old guys are going, no, let's send 18-year-olds.
Yeah.
So, I think I could see Bud's decline. It was obvious.
I was having this conversation this morning. I'm not joking. I was having this conversation this morning. I just moved and we're in our new house and my new neighbor across the street was out in front of her house and we met. And her husband's a Marine, has been for 15 years, active duty. And I mentioned to her that I volunteer at the USO at Camp Pendleton. And every year these kids look younger to me. Like now they look like they're 12, right? And when they come in the center and I'm checking out a video game to them so they can check out mentally for a little bit, and feel like they're back home kind of thing, briefly. I want to give them a hug and I want to call their mother and tell their mother that they ran away from home, You know what I mean? It's crazy. So a good friend of mine just started, and actually the first episode came out yesterday, started a podcast about PTSD. And she was a spouse of a warrior who had PTSD really bad. And the name of her podcast is The Wounds That Never Heal. I think is the name of it. I think it's Wounds That Never Heal. Tressa Brady's her name. But she would be somebody that I would love for you to talk to.
I would be happy to.
Just because it's true what you're saying. The government's not doing what they need to be doing for these kids. And we had a gentleman on that has a TBI from 2008 of all things. And he just was the week before I had him on, which was about a month ago, for our interview. He was in a hyperbaric chamber in North Carolina, and he lives in Nebraska or something. Anyway, he was in a hyperbaric chamber in North Carolina, and they went in and did a scan of his brain, and they found that he had a stroke at the ripe old age of like 20, and it was 2008. Well, that was 2008 was when the IED went off behind the vehicle he was driving and slammed his head forward. That was that traumatic brain injury. So now the government's starting to identify, partly with technology, but they're starting to identify some of these TBIs that happened way back when, and now they're trying to fix it. They're trying to help these kids, who they said had nothing wrong with them before. Now they're trying to help them, and it's admirable, but there's so much more that needs to be done. I mean, it's just unreal.
They don't want to recognize that mental injuries are equal to physical injuries.
Maybe more. They
Yeah,
might be more significant.
but they want to push them aside.
Yeah.
I just saw a book. Gosh, I can't think of the title. It's about a young woman. You remember when Lori passed a while, the Native American woman, and another woman they were in Iraq and they were taken prisoner. Piesta was killed. The other one was taken prisoner. Our guys went in and rescued her. Well, there was another woman who was in the convoy who got shot in the feet and was taken prisoner. And she was in a prisoner for 22 days before she was, saved. And she said, I was just a cook. She said, I just happened, I was, I joined to get money to go to college. And she came back and everybody patted her on the back and great. And then she realized she had some mental problems she was a prisoner for about 22 days, but some pretty crappy 22 days. Right.
Yeah.
And she came back and she finally admitted that, her family said, you have some problems. You need to go talk to, the military about your temper and what so she went, yeah, she has PTSD. Do you know what she got from the military for that? $50 a month.
Oh, great.
Extra pay for PTSD.
Terrific.
That's not
the worst part about this PTSD thing is they have a life, right? They grow up in a home, they go to school, they do all the things that we did as kids growing up, right? You went outside and played, you did all this stuff, right? And they graduate from high school and they decide, like this one that has the traumatic brain injury, he was told, we're either dropping you at a homeless shelter or you're going into the military. He chose the military.
Of course.
Right? We've got tons of stories of young men who were either going to go to prison or they were going to go into the military. So they go into the military, and it's something they've never experienced before in their lives. And they're in this group, they're in this unit. Like I interviewed a guy the other day, Randy Hetrick's his name. Randy was a Navy SEAL. And I asked him, I said, Randy, how in the world did you make it through BUDS? And he said, you know something, Mike? BUDS isn't about DOR, dropped on request, okay? Because that's what people make it about, right? The whole thing with G.I. Jane and all that, it's all, ring the bell, right? What it's about is they're forcing them together. So they're by challenging them the way they're challenging them and making them work in teams. You notice they never work individually. They work in teams or in boat teams, right? They end up coming together out of all this sort of carnage, if you will, and all this abuse and all this, right? They come together and they cohese as a unit, as a team. And he said, the ones who don't do this, they ring the bell. You with me? And they watch all this happen, and it's sort of perverted, but it's all part of the grand scheme. It's part of the plan to bring them together, because if they can make it through this, there's no telling what they can make it through on the other side of the world in some cesspool, right? Trying to save people, save US citizens, right?
And I understand that. I'm sure you've seen or read Band of Brothers.
Yeah.
And Lieutenant Colonel Sobel, they hate him.
Yeah.
He's the one that is harsh and brutal in training camp. And they would, he's a horrible leader out in the field, but he turned them into Easy Company into one of the best rifle companies ever because of that.
Yeah.
They hated him for it, but
Yeah.
he made them the best. And I do understand that, because then you get thrown into battle, and those guys died for each other in
Yeah.
great numbers because they were brothers. I understand that.
Well, they become this team, man. They become this team. And it's, you've heard the phrase, there are no atheists in foxholes.
Yes.
Okay. They become a team and they start relying on each other like family. And then they come back and they scatter.
Yep.
One's from Indiana, one's from Wyoming, one's from Nebraska, one's from, okay, they go poof. And now they're back with that home that raised them, that expects that they're going to get their old son back or their old daughter. They're going to get back what they raised. And what they get back is a warrior that can't find terra firma. They can't find, it's like they feel like the sand is shifting out from under their feet all the time. Okay. And the families don't know how to react to it. They don't know, they're not educated in how to do this. So I interviewed a chaplain the other day who has an intervention program that he does when they come back, where he kind of deprograms them, and he puts the families together with other families, and they sit down and they share what this family that's been through this shares with the new family that has a new person coming, active duty coming back, right? They put the active duty person together with somebody of the same rank who's come back, and they talk about their experiences. They swap contact information. It's almost like having a sponsor, right? Mm-hmm. And they do this. So this is an intervention that's done with a chaplain with the Army National Guard in Kentucky. And he's actually, this Tressa Brady that I told you about that's doing this podcast, she's actually interviewing him. I put them together. But they have this thing where they come together and they start this conversation about how different everything's going to be coming back. That's a big part, I feel like, of the PTSD thing, because if the family's not equipped to bring them back and understand what's going on, not equipped to deal with what's happening or what's coming, it furthers the isolation of that active duty member, and it deepens their despair. You with me?
Yes. Now think about the men in World War II who came back and said nothing. No one talked about anything.
Yeah.
Just wanted to leave it behind. Apparently my grandmother bemoaned the fact that my father just wasn't the same when he came back. I'm like, he was on a destroyer escort, and kamikaze came close enough to him that he could see the eyes of the pilot before they shot him down. You know, he had to bury pilots at sea. There was a lot of bad stuff, and she's like, he's just not the same.
Yeah.
But they never talked about it. My dad didn't talk to me about these things, so I started studying World War II in college.
I had a great uncle, Larry. He's passed away now, but he was in World War II, and he was on a aircraft carrier, and he cooked. He was a cook, and so he would come see us, and he'd make us breakfast, and he made the most unbelievable biscuits. He used to make tens of thousands of these biscuits. Okay, he used to make gravy in great big huge vats. Okay, and when they were out at sea, he would do all this. He'd work for hours and hours and hours and feed these thousands and thousands of hungry mouths. Okay. And you know what he did when they were eating? He went up top and manned a machine gun, and they got attacked by kamikaze pilots. And my uncle shot him out of the sky with no training, no marksmanship, none of that crap. He just started unloading, and he watched them. He saw them. He saw their faces as they were falling into the ocean shy of the ship. I mean, it's like unbelievable.
We ask regular people to do far from regular things.
Yeah. And then they come back and we expect them to be regular.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, I feel like we need an education here more than they need an education. You know what I'm saying? It's like, we need to be in a place where we can embrace them, but also where we're equipped to handle them. We're equipped to see the warning signs, and we're equipped to try and make sure that certain things aren't triggered. Anyway, I'm so happy that you're doing this because of the attention it's going to bring to a very, very important subject.
I don't know if I discussed it when I was on your show previously, but my first published book is called A Light in the Desert. And I wrote it for my baseball umpire partner. I was a baseball umpire for 25 years. And for 5 of those years, I went out to a field one day. There was a man I didn't know. He limped profoundly. He was, real nice. And not a lot of men treated me kindly when I was doing baseball because, I'm a woman.
Right.
And he and I ended up being partners for 5 years. He was a highly decorated Vietnam War veteran who, when he came home, took all the crap that those guys took.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand any of this then. I didn't. But as I got to know Don, because as an umpire, you go to the games, you dress out of the back of your car. In between doubleheaders, you got your chair out, you sit, you drink afterwards, blow off the sweat, right? And Don started telling me stories about Vietnam. And he was an advisor and special forces. And he went through horrendous, horrible things. But he never complained. And at the time, I lost my job in TV. I'm all whining about that. My husband was an alcoholic, and I was getting divorced. So I'm bitching about my life. And then I kept listening to him, and I'm going, I am such a jerk.
Yeah.
I am such a spoiled brat. And Don, he died at 60 of Agent Orange complications from Agent Orange poisoning. But he would be out in the field, and once a coach came at me, we were in men's leagues, and the coach kind of spitting on me, yelling. And Don, I could see he's out in the field, and this change came over him. And he gripped his fist. I said, Coach, you got to back up. You got to back up. You got to get out of there. And he's screaming. I'm like, we're going to have blood on the infield. Don was going to protect me like I was one of his guys. And luckily, the coach backed off at the last minute, and Don went okay. But that's when I first started thinking about soldiers. I didn't pay much attention before. And 5 years with Don made me realize that all the stuff I thought was important was not.
Yeah.
This man had 8 children, and they didn't understand him.
Yeah.
They just thought Dad was crazy.
Yeah.
And he ended up being totally disabled and dying very young. And that was kind of one the other reason I took on the Your Forgotten Sons, because I felt like I'm telling another story like Don's.
You are. And it's so unbelievably important. And there are hundreds of thousands that have stories like this, right? And you telling this lifts all of them up. I mean, and their families. I married, but just celebrated my 30th wedding anniversary in January. 30 years ago, my first year of marriage, my father-in-law, who was a physician's assistant for the Bureau of Prisons, had a retirement party. And we go to the retirement party. There's 500 people there, if there was one. It's insane how many people are there. And we go, and my father-in-law, who is one of the nicest people you'll ever meet in your life, sweet man, sweetheart, the whole thing. He is wearing a sport coat, like a, jacket, which I never see him in anything like that. He's super casual. Born in Puerto Rico, right? Born and raised in Puerto Rico, very poor area of Puerto Rico. And we're sitting at the end of the table, and he points to his lapel of his jacket. And he says, you know what that is? And it's a silver bar. He goes, you know what that is? I said, no. He said, that's the Silver Star. And I said, okay. I had no idea. And I had never served. I didn't know. And I said, okay. I didn't know that that's the next level below the Congressional Medal of Honor. I mean, I'm like, I didn't know. So he's like, I was awarded this in Vietnam. And I said, really? And he goes, yeah. He said, I was on a patrol boat with a chaplain. He was a medic in the Navy. He said, I was on a patrol boat with a chaplain, and we were on one of the rivers, one of the tributaries in Vietnam. And he said, we came upon this rice paddy, and there were hundreds of Marines in this rice paddy being ambushed. by the Viet Cong, who were on all of the hills around, almost like Normandy, right? Where they were shooting down onto them, and they were just picking them off. It was a massacre. And my father-in-law told the boat driver to pull over. He and the chaplain got out and they saved as many Marines as they could. He was also injured in that, and so he was awarded the Purple Heart and the Silver Star. Well, he tells me the details of the battle. He tells me what happened. We're driving home that night from the party, and my wife says, "What were you and Dad huddled at the end of the table talking about for so long?" And I said, "He was telling me the story of the battle where he was awarded the Purple Heart and the Silver Star." And she started crying. And I said, "Why are you crying?" She said, "Do you know he's never spoken of the war until you? He must really love you to be willing to open up like that."
Wow. And that it's so heartbreaking to me that so many men and women had these stories and
Yeah.
they just kept them to themselves.
Yeah. They
It's
don't
never talked about it.
talk about it because when they came back, they were called baby killer. They were called all these horrible names, and they don't want to open those wounds back up. They just take it and they compartmentalize it and they shove it down. Okay. This man was exposed to Agent Orange, and they're still evaluating him to make sure that he doesn't have cancer from it. Right. And he's 88 years old. But I mean, it's such a big deal what you're doing. And this book is such a big deal. And I cannot thank you enough from the bottom of my heart for writing this.
Well, thank you, Mike. I have to say it's the hardest book I've ever written.
I can only imagine.
And I'm wondering if people will even read. I mean, it's necessarily gruesome.
Yeah.
There's nothing gratuitous. It is what they did. And I'm hoping people do read it and understand that and maybe, thank a soldier.
Well, it'll bring something to light that's starting to come to light, right? I didn't know anything about the grave registry. I had no idea. Until I met you, I had no idea that was even a thing. I mean, obviously,
I didn't either.
right? Obviously, you have to go collect the bodies, but I haven't seen any movies about people
Because
collecting
the camera pans away. We
Yeah.
don't need to see that part.
Yeah.
After World War II, by the way, it was the Graves Registration Service. And then in Vietnam and to today, it's called Mortuary Services. So
Wow.
they changed it, but it's the same idea.
Yeah.
You have a battle anywhere in the world, someone has to fix what's left.
Yeah.
And yet every time I talk to people, they go, "Oh, I didn't ever think about what happened to the bodies."
Yeah.
And the people that get assigned to that.
So
So
my mom's best friend in the world, her husband was lost in a fighter jet. His fighter jet got shot down over Vietnam, and they've never found him. He's one of those that's MIA, and I just read an article the other day that they found somebody. And what they found was a fragment of a bone that they ran through DNA testing or whatever, and they identified this person, right? There's thousands, Ann, that's still
sometimes there's just nothing left. I
Yeah.
mean, and the men who went down in the sea. I mean,
Yeah.
what are you going to do? Though years ago when I was a print reporter, my editor said, "I want you to go out and do a story on Memorial Day. I want you to go out and look at all the parties and the game, the parades." And I said, "That's not what Memorial Day is."
Yeah.
I said, "It's about
Okay.
remembering." And I remember he looked at me, he went, "Write whatever you want." Okay. So I went to the local VFW post, and this is a long time ago. So we still had World War II veterans, and I interviewed 3 of them. And one gentleman, they were remembering the people that didn't come back.
Yeah.
One gentleman said they were lowering me down into the sea from a helicopter to retrieve the bodies. He might have been like mortuary graves registration.
Right.
There were sharks swimming all around. And he said they decided they couldn't lower me down. And because we couldn't retrieve the bodies, And because we didn't know if it was one person or two, they could never declare them legally dead.
Yeah.
And that stayed with him and bothered him his whole life.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah. Rough, man. That's a hard burden to carry.
and look at how most of us don't pay any attention to that unless you have a soldier in your family.
Yeah.
Or, work with the military. We go on our merry ways, staring at our phones and looking at cat videos. And we really aren't paying attention. And part of me thinks people won't want to read the book because it's hard to read. But I still think you have to tell these stories.
Well, I'm glad you did, and I hope a lot of people read it.
I do too.
Because it really is impactful. It is. It's impactful, and it's a big deal, and you're a big deal. And I am so unbelievably blessed that we met.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you. I will say one more thing, that Bud's men and the other men in the Graves Registration Service were embarrassed by what they did.
Yeah.
They did not tell their families. And in one scene from the book, Crosses in the Winds, the Graves guys are coming down a road with trucks with bodies full of them. And the other American soldiers saw them coming and turned their backs on them.
mhm.
Like they were bad for some reason. And I understand it was about fear of death and everything, but these men are doing the worst job and no one ever said, hey, good for you. Thank you.
This
Thank
is that ostrich syndrome we talked about earlier.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
bury
But
your head in the
soldiers
sand.
treated
You
them,
turn your
and they
back.
were told they didn't tell their families. They were, a lot of them were horribly embarrassed by what they were doing.
If you
And
don't see it, it's not real, right?
yeah.
So your Forgotten Sons,
Yes. And you can buy it anywhere. It's all over.
and I can't thank you enough.
Well, thank you for
I hope
having
you come
me.
back. I hope you keep writing, and I hope you come back for the next book.
I would be happy to. I would be happy to. I this one's got me a little. I haven't written anything but articles lately. I'm sort of just decompressing, as it
I
were.
can imagine.
But I love writing. It gives me joy. So I will probably write some more.
I hope you do, and I hope you come back on to talk about your future work.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I appreciate
I
it.
appreciate you. Thank you for being here. We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Mike Litton Experience. If you did, do us a favor, smash that subscribe button, tell your friends, family, and coworkers about our program, and wherever you get your podcasts, please leave us a rating. It helps us to connect with quality people just like you.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at Litton Realty. Want to meet with Mike? Check out calendly.com/Rio760.